Hi everyone that's tuning in. Thanks for coming in for another UMiami resident hour. My name is Victor. I'm a PGY1 here at the University of Miami, and our special guest today is Aditya, our spine fellow at the University of Miami, who completed his training at Baylor. And together, what Aditya and I have in common is that we both did medical school outside the United States. And what that means is we both know what it's like to try and apply for neurosurgery in the United States. So I'm just assuming everyone tuning in has some sort of interest in either looking at trying to apply to try to apply for neurosurgery residency here in the US, be you an international medical graduate or a local. There are tips and tricks I think that Aditya and I both have that would be of benefit to you, although some of this talk will be specific to those coming from overseas, but also those that perhaps want to do a research year as well, just keeping that broad sense of mind as we move forward. So I'm going to kick things off a little. We're going to introduce ourselves, and then Aditya and I are going to take turns talking about different aspects of the application process, what we found useful and what we think we wish we would have known at the time. And at the end, we'll open up for some discussion, and feel free at any time to ask questions in the Q&A box. I think if we can answer it during the talk, we'll answer it then. Otherwise, definitely by the end of it, Aditya and I have time to answer things and have a conversation with you guys about different aspects. And please, one thing I have to thank Aditya for joining this, because when I was applying for my path, I really had no idea, and I really wish someone kind of just gave me the ins and outs of what they did, so I had a better understanding as I embarked on my journey. So thank you, Aditya, for joining us today. All right, so let's just, before we introduce ourselves, why the US? I mean, everyone listening here must be interested in the neurosurgery in the US, otherwise, or the US in general, otherwise why would you be listening to us today? And for us, there's multiple reasons why you could be interested here in the US. The Hollywood effect. When I growing up in Australia, I saw it on TV all the time. You heard it in the news, you saw it everywhere. It was the place you wanted to see, or at least for me, I wanted to see all the time. So that was definitely one big reason why I paid attention. For those people that are a little bit more practical, surgery, in particular neurosurgery, one of the great things here is that it's in one location. And depending on what country you come from, other countries, neurosurgery training is not in one location. It can be in multiple cities, multiple states. And whereas here in the US, it's primarily based through one program in one location, one city. So it's always a benefit there. And yes, sorry, let me go back. I'm getting distracted here. And finally, university affiliation. What I love about here in the US is that most programs are academic. There's an affiliation. And so if anyone has any academic aspirations, then this place is definitely a place in the US to do it, because your training is often affiliated with an academic institution. For example, here is the University of Miami, Baylor College of Medicine, where Aditya is. Everywhere there's a lot of academic affiliations, which I find very cool, because not every country does that. Now, just briefly, I'm going to talk about my path. Aditya is going to take over then and talk about his path. But for me, I did a undergraduate degree in science, particularly chemistry. I did that in Sydney. And then I did my MD, and I did a Master of Philosophy as a graduate degree, also at the University of Sydney in Australia. I took my step 1 in 2015, and we'll go over the timeline of things, especially if you're coming from overseas, about when to do what. I was fortunate enough to do an elective at the Mayo Clinic in 2016, and then I also took step 2 CS and CK that same year. As you may know, step 2 CS, well, up until COVID at least, you did here in the US. And so when I was here for my elective or my sub-I, I managed to do my step 2 CS as well. I did a kind of unique path. I kind of found that I had an interest in research and interest in neuroscience. So I was lucky enough to go then spend a year in Oxford in England to do my science degree. It was kind of at that time where I really thought that I'd be interested in research, in particular brain tumors. And I was fortunate enough then to embark on a PhD back in Sydney. At the same time, I took step 3. Again, we'll talk about all these steps in a second. But for me, I went to a conference in the US and I timed it such that I could also take step 3 as well in New Orleans. After that, I finished my PhD. I then went to the Mayo Clinic for a research fellowship. I was able to do like a postdoc sort of position in a wet lab based on the work that I did for my PhD and my master's. And it was around that time I started to look into what, the green card application and work permit application, which is something that we will touch base on later. It's very, and I'm sure Adit, you would agree with me, very important if you're an international coming to the US to look at these particular aspects that perhaps local students don't have to worry about. And finally enough, I was very lucky to match into this neurosurgery program here at the University of Miami. I'm about 2 months in, and I love it. I can't speak highly enough of this program. And, I'm very fortunate. And this is one way, I hope to give back by sharing out my experience. And I'm sure Aditya feels the same. So I'm going to let him take over now and talk about his path here today.
Okay. Thanks, Victor. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yeah, my name is Aditya Vedantam. I'm a spine fellow here at the University of Miami. And I did my residency at Baylor College of Medicine, which is in Houston. So yeah, talking about my path, so I did what's MBBS, which is equivalent to the MD in Vellore, India. It's in the south of the country. Finished in 2009. I did 2 years of basically like junior residency. It was kind of a mandatory service I had to give back to the hospital. But actually it was a good time because it helped me like finish med school, think about what I wanted to do. And about the first year, then I knew I wanted to come to the US, and neurosurgery was one of the things that was interesting to me. I spent a year in the neuro ICU when I was doing this in India. And so I did step 1 in 2010. This was in India, step 2 CK. And then I got a postdoc kind of research fellowship in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for 2 years. And so I went in 2011, I did my step 2 CS while I was there. And I'll talk about this later, but I had a very supportive mentor. And so he gave me time to do these sub-Is. And essentially I did the same number of sub-Is that a US graduate would do. I did spend a month in Hershey, spent a month in Milwaukee, and then I was able to spend, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks in Iowa City. I did my step 3 before the ranking list. This is for those interested in knowing about the H-1B visa. You need to finish that before you join residency. Otherwise, your program cannot apply for your, it's hard for the program to apply for the H-1B if you don't have a step 3. I did residency at Baylor, finished this June, and now I'm here in Miami for a year. Next, yeah. So I guess some of the considerations, when you're thinking about coming to the US from another country, definitely it is, as expected, it's foreign. You're going to be away from family. You may have family here in the US, which is definitely helpful, especially if you're interviewing and you have to travel. Family and friends are definitely helped me, and they will help you, putting you up, maybe if you have to do your CS or CK, CS or step 3 somewhere. International graduates, I think if you have gone to a non-US medical school, it's just seen differently. I don't think the quality of education you received is any particularly bad or anything, but it's just seen differently, and you're an unknown entity. So there's some reason for you to prove yourself because you had training that was different from what most people have here. I think the next point is one of the most important, which is visas. I think any graduate, anybody who's thinking about doing neurosurgery in the US, who is not a US citizen or a green card holder, needs to know visas inside out. Otherwise, you are going to be in a situation where you may join residency and may not be allowed to stay in the country legally for long enough. Because neurosurgery as a 7-year residency is much longer than the internal medicine residencies. And so your visa needs to last that long. And this is actually something where talking to other people, even getting a lawyer, can help you really understand what your options are. Otherwise, sometimes this actually limits your opportunities because you just didn't think about it in time. And the visa processing takes much longer than the application process. So it's something we'll talk about later.
Definitely important, and definitely something we're going to highlight a bit more. Although I'll say this now, neither Aditya or I are immigration lawyers.
Yeah, it's true.
Keep that in mind as well. Let's go.
Yeah, so the longer path, yes, for sure. I mean, you finish medical school, wherever you are, you come here and you're going to spend some time doing research and things like that. But in the long run, 1 or 2 years does not matter a lot. And each one, to me, each person is going to carve their own path. You either do a PhD, you may do a postdoc research fellowship. Sometimes you just do a pre-residency clinical fellowship, somebody drops out and you're in. So there are different ways, but I think having some kind of plan is useful because you can't count on those coincidences or happenings, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, so for me, I think a plan B, I think is important. I would say that it's important to commit to neurosurgery. Like, yes, I do want to do neurosurgery. If I don't get in the first time, I'm going to try again, which is great. But a plan B on how you're going to try again, I think that helps, because so that you're not left after match day wondering what I'm going to do. You've already thought about it, and you can then execute your plan. And yeah, Victor is absolutely right. Nothing is certain. I think that's why I say have another plan, talk to people, and you'll be able to figure out there are opportunities everywhere. It's often just knowledge is the most valuable thing, and so you just have to be prepared that the path may not be as straight as it was in your home country where you knew what was going to happen next. There may be 1 or 2 years of uncertainty, but it does pay off once you get in. Yeah, so this graph is from the NRMP showing match rates for non-US, for basically a variety of candidates, but here focusing on this pink line, the non-US international graduates. So this is actually match rates for all specialties, so not only neurosurgery. But you can see it is encouraging, at least in the last decade or so, there's been an increasing trend of non-US graduates matching in various specialties here in the US. So it's not impossible, and definitely there is a need and there is a place for you. It's just that you have to find it and make yourself attractive candidate.
Definitely, definitely.
This is looking at data for more specifically for neurosurgery. I would say just focus on the actual numbers, and you'll see every year it fluctuates, but it can vary from about 5 to 15, maybe maximum up to 18 candidates per year match into neurosurgery, and these are candidates who had done med school outside the U.S. and then came here to match. So the number is not high, but it's not zero. So every year there is somebody, and I think you just have to kind of remember that it's difficult, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, and yeah, I would also add on top, you look at neurosurgery's number and the absolute number, it's much
Correct.
smaller than sort of like, say, categorical surgery, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, it's still higher than thoracic and vascular.
Correct.
We have
Correct.
to be somewhere in the middle, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is an interesting slide actually. So it looks at what like different features of the candidates who applied and matched and those who did not match. And for this is specific for neurosurgery, and you can see um, the one thing I'll say is the number two, the number of distinct specialties ranked 1.1. So you really need to commit. I don't think it works if you do. I'm applying for neurosurgery and neurology or neurosurgery and internal medicine. That's not going to work. I think focusing on one specialty is definitely the way to go. Step scores are important. Step one, as you can see. And this is what I've seen elsewhere too, just generally being a foreign graduate in the US is you got to be better than the people here. And it's just a fact of life. And I think these scores reflect that. I mean, you really have to perform well and show that you're more than capable of competing at the level that you want to be at. I think the research experience is something Victor and I both have experience with. You have to spend that extra time. It gives you a great opportunity to network, find opportunities, finish the USMLEs, as well as get your visa status secured. So there are definitely some benefits of having this research experience in the US. You can see abstracts, presentations, publications, I think is correlate to the research experiences because you've had all that extra time. And the dual degrees, yes, I think when I was applying to a PhD was an option. That's something you can think about. You can do it here in the US. Definitely, it adds something to your CV as well as your networking capabilities, but it's not essential. Another graduate degree. One thing when I was applying, people talked about the MPH. I'm not 100% sure how valuable that is. I think working with a neurosurgeon while you're doing your research is probably more valuable to stay in the specialty. It's such a small community. It's great if you know somebody really well.
And you know what I find super fascinating about this table is that on the left it's US IMGs, so US citizens that have gone to a medical
Correct.
school outside the US, and you can see zero matched in 2018, which I
Mhm.
found very interesting. The reason this is the 2018 is because they don't have this data for our later years. But I find it very interesting that the non-US IMGs, there were 10 that matched this that year, 18 that didn't, but at
Yeah,
least some did. So I guess you have to start asking why is that the case? Obviously, what I think this shows is it's not purely a citizenship thing. Because if it was a US citizenship being favored, then the US IMGs would have matched more. So
correct, correct. Yeah.
I think some people believe, the citizenship is a big barrier, and I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but I guess just also looking at this table, it also goes to suggest it's not everything.
Correct, correct. And then you can see that I mean, the candidates who matched, I mean, they've really performed phenomenally well on the step one scores, step two scores, the abstracts,
Yeah,
publications, work experience. So they've really, they've made themselves more than attractive as a candidate. And I think, I mean, that just goes to show that they probably spent that extra time trying
exactly,
to make themselves a great candidate to apply.
exactly. Okay, moving on.
So yeah, I think this you can divide, the way you're going to apply for residency, and in particular to these four phases. Um, I think the pre-application phase may be a med school phase, but for foreign graduates, it's going to be the phase where you do some research in the U.S. or some time you spend in the U.S. where you interact or you network and you spend some time. So you could be a pre-residency fellow where you spend clinical time in the US, or you do some research. But that is the time you got to work hard to getting, like focusing on how you're going to get your letters of recommendation, who's going to write them, what your research is, have some publications under your belt, some presentations. And then when you're doing your sub-Is, yes, you're like any other medical student here. You got to work hard and prove that you're able to work on the clinical side just as efficiently as the medical students who train here. Once you put in your application into ERAS, you're ready for your interviews. I think that's an important time to actually work with your mentor to kind of secure as many interviews as you can. It's very clearly shown in all the data that the more number of interviews you attend, the more likelihood you are to match. Now, some cases you may, only get a few interviews, but you have a high likelihood of matching in the program you're doing research in. While that may work, it's always better to have some backup and other interviews because you never know how things are going to work out in the end. And then the interview process is something it's a great opportunity to talk to residents where you are. I spoke to residents in Milwaukee and they gave me great tips on what I need to do. And that's something I would recommend to anybody applying. Post-interview is an important phase even for foreign graduates because that's the time you really want to finalize things like your visa. And if you have to do step three, then you want to knock that out. And your rank list also needs to be done in a pragmatic way. I don't. There are reasons why some programs may be ranked lower than others, maybe related to the visa, not actually the quality of the program. So those are some of the things you just have to think about, which is a little different, but it's not impossible. I think talking to people, you'll get those ideas. Yeah, so looking at the timeline, this one I added a visa situation right in the beginning. It may be straightforward for some of you, may not be, but it's something you want to figure out, because the visa processing, if you talk to any lawyers, anybody who's in it, takes a long time and it's not predictable. And programs are not just going to wait for your visa to come in and then you're going to start. They need somebody to start on July 1st. So having some plan as to how you're going to have your visa sorted out for your residency, it's good to get that started as early as possible. But anyway, you've got that done. You've put in your application. You've submitted it sometime in September to ERAS, and you start getting invitations for interviews. Good time to network with your mentor to kind of see if you can get you other interviews that people he knows. Just calling you for an interview really increases your chances. So doing as many as you can, and then you go for your interviews, and then you prepare your rank list. This is also a good time to have with your work with your mentor as trying to get the rank list set, because they'll give you some ideas and tips of which programs are better for you and where the likelihood of you matching may be higher. You have match day, and then, as I mentioned, the visa finalization. But I think this visa finalization waiting to start in March is going to be too late. So have an idea through this whole application process. If you need to apply for another visa or you need to apply for your green card, something, have that start that process early. And then obviously on July 1st, you get a match, you start residency, and yeah, you're on your way.
Yeah, yeah. No looking back at that point.
Yeah. So yeah, I think when you think about applying, there are definitely different things you need to apply. The medical degree, some countries in India, there's no undergraduate, you just do high school straight into medical school. Um, but the steps are something that are a little challenging to finish in medical school. I did it after, and I think it was useful when I took it, which was almost a decade ago. The step one was actually easier to do once you finish medical school because there were a lot of clinically oriented questions. So it was actually easier to kind of figure those out. The CS, it's good to, you have to do that before you, I mean, it's best if you do that before you have to do it, sorry, before you apply because you need the ECFMG certification. And the CK also, I would say don't skimp on those CK. I would say try to get a good score on that. That shows up well on your application. And compared to most US graduates, you will be the only one of few candidates who actually have a CK score because they don't have to do that before their application. I think letters of recommendation is really important. And what's more important is getting them from surgeons in the US. You may have done exceptionally well in medical school back in your home country. Unfortunately, unless your mentor or the person writing the letter of recommendation is really internationally renowned, it's tough to make an impact. I interviewed, prospective residents at Baylor in my final year, and you see so many applications, thousands of letters of recommendation, but some names pop out more than others. They have all these nice letterheads and things like that, and those really pop out and make a difference. And so I think it's important to have letters of recommendation from surgeons, neurosurgeons in particular in the US. I think the US experience is critical. I think it's almost, I personally don't know of anybody who is matched here in the US without any US experience. And you can either do it as an elective, if your medical school will allow it sometime during then, or spend extra time on research. Yeah, actually, Victor, with your US experience, was that during medical school? You went to the Mayo Clinic, or was
Yeah,
that
yeah.
something?
So at least in my medical school, you could do a couple months abroad. So I went over. But you know what's interesting to note is that as a medical student, um, an international medical student, not every program will host international medical students for rotations, which I
Mhm.
didn't realize until I started looking into it. And of the ones that do, some of them actually charge money uh,
Yep, heard
for
of
you
that.
for you to participate in those. And again, it's only once you start looking for those opportunities you start to realize they're not as common as they would be if you're a US medical student.
Exactly. So I think so that's the U.S. Experience. That is a clinical experience where you can do an elective. There is also research experience. You could spend a few months, but I think if you really want to get a foothold in the programs here or in the system here, it's going to be 1 or 2 years. And you can either do a degree, you could do a master's, or you could even go for a PhD, which may be longer. But the time you spend is time to be productive, publications, and really prove to your mentor who's really going to guide you that you are deserving and you want to take this forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, visa support we spoke about. Yeah, there are different visas. The ones I am kind of familiar with are J1 and H1B. The J1, it might have changed now, but the J1 is more of a training visa. There is a home requirement. The H1B is more of like a work visa. But the only thing I'd say is with the H1B, the step 3 is important before you actually join. And the H-1B requires a little more preparation in terms of getting
think
it
we
because
can talk
it's
about
a
that
second year.
in a later slide. So,
Okay.
yeah, and so just
So yeah, I think with the medical degree we spoke about, it's different. Your transcripts are a little different. I don't think that makes a big difference, frankly. When I went through applications, when I was interviewing, prospective residents, I can't go through these transcripts. There's so many pieces of paper; it's hard to really make out what what anybody actually studied.
like,
Uh, but it's just difficult, but it needs to be done. It's part of the essential paperwork. So you got to get it from your medical school. Sometimes that takes a while if your medical school is not used to preparing it in the way they want it here.
exactly. And I can tell you, my medical school didn't provide a GPA, so we didn't even, so we couldn't even apply with a GPA. We used a high distinction credit pass system, and most people in the US are not familiar with that. So a lot of people don't really know what that means.
Yeah.
So it's only difficult to interpret in the sense that it's difficult for some people to relate to more than anything.
Correct. The USMLE scores, yeah, I think this is true. The step 1, I think the most important, that does shine out. And sometimes there are people attending who talk about it even several years later after you finish residency, they're still talking about step 1 scores. So I would say if that is something you really want to work hard on, get a good number. I do understand it is changing to a pass-fail sometime. Either way, work hard and do well on that. Step 2 CK, I think, is also important, especially since that's one score you may have that other applicants from the US won't. So it kind of maybe distinguishes you a little bit. The CS needs a little preparation. It's more of an English exam, but kind of also gives you an idea of how healthcare is a little bit here, some personal interactions. So something to work on. You don't want to get stopped or have any hurdles there. You want to get through these as smoothly as you can.
Yeah.
And yeah, the step 3. So this one is true after graduation, but once you have your medical degree, because you're a foreign graduate, you can do step 3 before you finish, before you start residency. I would recommend that, frankly. It's just easier to get it out of the way.
And
And then
definitely,
you get your cert. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, and that's why it's sometimes important, if you want to take time off to do research or something, it gives you time after graduating to apply for step 3, do step 3 before you apply. Like you have, because you have to have graduated in order to take it.
Correct. Yeah, and so we talked about letters of recommendation. I think your minimum of 3 is correct. If you can get 4 and all 4 are from the US, that'd be excellent too. Yeah, I think you can get 1 from your home country. I don't think that's wrong or anything. It's sometimes it's nice to see a different format and how people write different letters. But the ones from the US definitely play a role. I know when I was sitting on ranking meetings, people are talking about how this person wrote this letter and this professor wrote that letter. So it makes a difference. Somehow to the chairman and the other attendings, this shines a little brighter than the other parts of your application.
Definitely. All right.
So looking at the US experience, this is right. We went over this. It's the greatest way to get your US base because nobody in the US is going to write a letter of recommendation if they've never met you or they've not spent more than, at least a couple of weeks at least with you before they write a letter of recommendation that has some substance. The electives are great. They show clinical skills. The other thing the electives do, if you do sub-Is or electives, is you spend time with the residents. And many attendings will ask for their residents' opinion before they rank you. So it's important that you have, show that that you're ready to help and you're ready to work and you're a hard worker and the residents like you. I think that's important because they are going to be some of your best fans because they'll talk to the attendings and they'll know that you're a good candidate.
Mm-hmm.
The research years during or after medical school, yeah, I think if you're spending a full year or 2, for me it was after medical school. It is difficult in some ways if you are funding it yourself. Otherwise, it's just a job where you're getting paid a salary. But if you have a mentor who's very supportive, they will give you the time required to kind of apply, do the exams, and if sometimes even do the sub-Is. But you have to be productive as well. So nothing is given. But I think it's a good time to really learn the system and put your best foot forward.
Great. All right.
So,
Thanks for that. I'm gonna talk a little bit now about research. We're gonna then talk a little bit more about our experiences, our personal journeys, and then I see some questions are coming in. We might just save them to the end. That way, we just don't lose track of what we're doing. Everything research experience, I guess, is a great way to stand out. Although people might not understand which country you're from, what medical school system you're familiar with, they do understand research. Everyone understands research. And so publications and presentations are relatable. And if you have a lot of them or you've done very high impact ones, then, people are able to judge that. And it's a tool you can use sometimes to demonstrate your productivity, which is something that, a lot of programs like to see. Extra graduate degrees, they have, I think different programs view them differently. Again, similarly to your medical degree, where did they come from? What topic was it in? How long did it take? When did you do it? For example, someone that did a master, a PhD in chemistry before medical school could be viewed as different as someone who did a MPH during medical school. Like it's, I think there's no set rule that one will make you stand out more than another, or indeed if you need one. I have many colleagues that are IMGs that have matched into neurosurgery without one. So, I wouldn't say there's a rule for that. And perhaps, for the sake of time, I won't go too much into it, but, when it comes to research, there's always a great debate about basic science versus clinical work. And we can perhaps have this a little bit later, but, ultimately, in my opinion, research is research, no matter what it is. And, if you're doing basic science work, ultimately you'll probably want to end up in a program that does basic science. And if it's a program that does basic science, they will understand the differences it takes to do good research in that versus research in a clinical setting. And finally, first author versus middle author, I guess we're getting into little nuances of publications. Again, we can maybe have this discussion a little bit later, but in my eyes, a publication is a publication, first and foremost. If you're getting to the point where you're discussing first versus middle author, I think you're in a better space than some other people. So I think we can leave it at that, and we'll just keep going. Now, here's the really interesting bit. This is probably very specific to the international medical graduates with us today, and I'm not going to belabor the point, but as Aditya said, and I just want to echo, you have to understand your options. This is so important. You have to understand the options and what you can do and how they relate to neurosurgery. J1 visas are by far the most common visas that people in neurosurgery match on if they're an IMG. And I would dare say not even just neurosurgery, but across all medical specialties in the US. There are many reasons why this is the case. One, institutions don't need to sponsor these. The ECFMG, the body that handles IMG, sponsors it. So institutions don't have to worry about the prices, the organization, the lawyers, etc. It's done by someone else. What I would want to stress, and I think it's important to know, is that for the most part, if you have a J1 visa, it's an exchange visa. And part of that exchange visa means you have to return to your home country for 2 years after you've finished using it. And that's very important because, a lot of people seek training in the US, but they also perhaps want to seek a life in the US as well. And having this overhanging perhaps, is kind of burdensome in the long run. I have an asterisk there because, there are cases where either you can get a waiver, but that waiver, one, is not always guaranteed, and two, typically involves you having to serve as a neurosurgeon in an underserved area. Now, how feasible that is very situation dependent, but ultimately it must be done. The one thing I haven't got written here is that, neurosurgery training is 7 years, and if you start on a J1 visa, you are not eligible to apply for any green card, citizenship, naturalization process until you serve those 2 years, which is very different to if you're on the next one, which we're going to talk about, which is H1B visa. It's program sponsored, so it's not as common. It's rare. It costs money. As Aditya said, you need step 3 to apply for it. So you have to plan to make sure that if this is what you want, you have to have step 3. But that said, not everyone even guarantees that you will have a program, you will match to a program that sponsors it. A lot of programs now, when you apply, and especially when I went through, had very strict rules. We do not sponsor H1B, we only sponsor J1. And so as Aditya just said, this may or may not influence you how you rank things. The final thing worth mentioning specific to neurosurgery is, our training is 7 years and the H1B is limited to 6 years. I'm not too familiar with how one actually goes then about organizing the 7th year. Aditya, have you got any thoughts on that? How did you do that?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I applied for a green card sometime during residency, and it worked out. But there you can apply for a 7th every additional year. This is what I knew at that time, was every additional year you could apply for a 1-year extension.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so I get
That
that.
extension also doesn't go on forever. I think it's a couple of years and then it runs out. So I really need to have a lawyer. And I think immigration lawyers, unfortunately, you have to, get to know one and have them help you a little bit, because nobody knows your visa situation better than yourself. And the program for sure does not, because there are no visa specialists in the program. They just know whatever the college tells them. But if your lawyer can help you, they can guide you as to what the best options are.
Yep, yep. And finally, the last sort of exception to the visa case is if you already have a green card, if you're applying for a green card, or if you have a work permit. This can be the marriage-based self-petitioned. I won't go too much more into this, but it is possible, is what I pursued, but it's a long time. It takes at least a year to get that all sorted. So again, you have to do a lot of planning for graduating, trying to do research, trying to apply, having to time, applications with the assumption that this will all go. Currently with COVID right now and our current political situation, it's very difficult to predict how long exactly it takes moving forward. But just to kind of bring this home, like what type of tips have we got? And the first one is plan. And, we've covered a lot of things. We've covered everything that you need and what you need to consider, and that's plan, plan, plan. You have to not only think about what you need next month, next year, but perhaps even a couple of years in advance if you're early on in medical school. You have to time things right. Aditya and I both found a mentor. I think we're both very lucky that we feel lucky that we found our mentors, and we're going to share that experience with you in a little bit. But having a mentor, at least in my circumstance, really helped me. He's become a very close person in my life to me right now. Other tips is be productive. Obviously, people talk about it, but I mean, you can't underemphasize how much you need to be productive. To be noticed, because again, as I said, whilst not everyone understands what country you may come from, what system you may be from, everyone understands productivity and everyone understands research. And I would argue it adds competitiveness to your application. And finally, possibly finally, I would say be proactive. You can't wait for these opportunities to come. You have to seek them. And also, have realistic expectations. Not everyone you try to connect with is going to reply. Neurosurgeons are busy, very busy, and multiple emails coming to their inbox every day. So be proactive, but and be realistic, I think, are two very good tips. Now, I'm going to share my mentor experience, and Aditya will share his, but it just really goes to show how, how much it can really change your life, having a great mentor. This is Dr. Daniels. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon at the Mayo. And I met him when I was doing my sub-I, and he was super nice, but he's always nice. So I mean, it's no different there. But when I was in the OR, when I was in the clinic on service with him, we just, we really connected. It's funny though, at the time when I was sub-Ing, I didn't really plan on applying to the US, but it was really great to work with him. I helped write one paper with him actually. And then, so, later on, I finished my research in Australia and England. I then reached out to him, and, he was very fortunate. I was very fortunate for him to take me on and be my mentor, and during my research year with him, I would meet with him weekly. It was fantastic. He was a very academic surgeon, and, we were able to really focus on academic endeavors, and, we took initiatives. And, I had the trust to ask him questions about everything within the system, what he knew about Mayo, what he knew about the US, what his experience was with IMGs, and that was very, eye-opening and something that was very important to me moving forward. And finally, during the application process, he helped with everything. He helped, letters of recommendation, he helped with the reassurance because I needed a lot. Going through this process is not easy. So I had a lot of reassurance from him, insights into programs and constant check-ins. So having a mentor that is familiar with what you want and then is also part of the system of where you want to go, I thought was very, very useful.
That was nice, Victor. And I think I had a kind of a similar experience. Mine was a little different in some ways. So my mentor is Dr. Kurpad, who then was not the chairman, but now is the chairman at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. I think I had met him actually on one of the international conferences, which was in India. And then he had a job for a postdoc, a kind of research fellowship, and I said I'll apply, and I got into that. And so it was a research project that he himself was, the PI. So he was extremely involved in the actual research and all the what my work was. So that was excellent. So there was a lot of interaction. And then I was very transparent as to why I was doing 2 years. And I think that's important. If you have a mentor and you know that this is somebody you can trust, then you've got to be transparent. Because otherwise, they're thinking you're going to just sit and do research for years without knowing what your actual plan is. And then there's conflict. So I was transparent and he understood. And so he gave me a lot of advice on applications, research, career planning. I think some of the pieces of advice he gave me was one, you need to commit. So he said, really just apply for all these programs and not have any like, I'm going to apply for neurology or some other, associated field or something else as a backup. No, it's just going to be one program, one specialty. And then he also, one thing that helped was he himself was an IMG. So he kind of knew some of the problems or the barriers that we have. And he was able to kind of help me overcome those. So I am going to be lifelong grateful to him for his help with this. But it is hard to find a mentor, and I'm telling you, this is a challenge. Even once you finish residency, you're looking as faculty job to find mentors is difficult. The one thing I would say is at least you need to have some rapport with them. And I think Victor had it with his mentor, and I developed it with Dr. Kurpad. And I think some rapport so that you have a trust and you're able to kind of have both of you are aware of what your career plans are.
Yeah.
But I think this is a difficult, neurosurgery is hard to get into, and without a mentor, it's even tougher.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. So, guys, just before we start answering questions and having open discussion, there are some resources to consider. The NRMP has a lot of stats. You know, everyone loves stats, so that's there. Student blogs are very good. They're real time. They're both IMG participants and also local student participants. They have a lot of interview stuff. When interviews come out, Neurosurgery Hub is one. I think Uncle Harvey has come back to life as well. And Twitter. I mean, there are multiple people on Twitter that are now part of the movement, and they do provide insight. So I think those are some resources to go to. I've been just quickly, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but this is a very passionate area of mine as I went through, and I thank World Neurosurgery for really taking the initiative to allow me to write a couple of these things. I really recommend, after this talk, if you want to learn a little bit more about, my views or what I think, some trends are in the literature. World Neurosurgery has been very nice to allow us to, compose multiple articles that I think, taken together should give you a better idea of where we stand today with everything. So I'm just going to leave that there. And finally, guys, like before we start answering questions, it's not easy. I think this graph kind of demonstrates what I mean by that here. If you look at the top US students, the percentage of matching into neurosurgery is very proportional to a step 1 score. Whereas I would almost argue that it's not as obviously proportional here. And also the average percent to match is also lower, 60% versus 20%. So guys, it's not easy, but neurosurgery in itself is not easy. So you make it through to this, that's exactly what you need to make it through the whole residency program. So guys, I think we've got a number of questions coming up, so we're going to try to answer all of them here now. Here are some more topics if we get to them. There are our contacts as well if you're so interested. So let's start answering some questions here. Lohit's first question, I'm sorry I missed this, was previous resident hour recordings are posted on the Miami Neurosurgery YouTube channel, so you can always look at that. Richard's now asking, what do you look for searching for a mentor? How frequently should you email research programs or potential mentors? Aditya, what do you think?
What do you look for when searching for a mentor without connections? Yeah, I think that that is challenging. I think if you have an interest in neurosurgery, there probably is a connection somewhere in your medical school, in your neurosurgery departments in your own country. It is a challenge. Actually, what Victor mentioned, I have to say, when you're looking for research, I just saw like on Twitter, people posting, we need somebody for research. There was one from WashU recently in neurosurgery. And that's probably the modern way of getting this done. So I would say keep your ears open and your eyes and ears open because opportunities can come in different ways. A lot of people there are people hiring even during the pandemic. It may take longer for you to get here, but there are people who need the research work to continue. Frequently to email, I think, I mean, if I don't think there's a number or this thing, but if you don't get a response in 2 or 3 emails, they're probably, it's not probably the best avenue for you. And that may be a good thing. Maybe there's somebody who's more responsible will actually be more useful for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, the next question comes again from Richard. Do you think there is a predilection for a particular research interest or subspecialty on the merits of being an IMG?
I don't know. Is he trying to say, I guess, the research area? So mine was spinal cord, and Victor's was in neuro-oncology. So I don't think it matters. It's best if it's in neurosurgery. Neuroscience is okay, but getting your letters of recommendation may be a little more difficult.
I have a good friend of mine. He did his research. He's also from overseas. He did research in the US. He researched spine, but now he wants to go into tumor now that he's in residency. So I mean, don't ever think that it's going to lock you down for anything.
Yeah.
All right. Reginald asks, how important was diversity and inclusion when applying for residency, and what steps can programs show that they are inclusive to applicants? Diversity is important. I think it's not just neurosurgery residency. I think there's many avenues in life where diversity is important. And, I'm yet to come across a program that is not openly diverse or inclusive. How do I know that? I mean, when I was applying last year, a lot of programs say what you need to be eligible. And not one program said IMGs are not eligible to apply. In fact, a lot of programs actually openly stated that they will support a particular visa, and I mean you would only need a visa if you were a non-US citizen. So I think that was a great sign when I was doing that. How did I say that? In the internet websites, and you can also email programs as well. So I think those are two good ways to look at things. Claudia says, how can you find clinical or research opportunities as an IMG? What do you think, Aditya?
So I think clinical opportunities, I think you got to search for these pre-residency clinical fellowships. There are a couple around the country. When I was applying, there was one at Cleveland Clinic. I know there are a couple other places. I think Miami also, there are a few pre-residency clinical fellows. But this is something you can search online for clinical opportunities. Research opportunities are a little challenging, and I think it's somehow making a connection with somebody who is in the US, who you kind of know a little bit of some personal way. They may open up an opportunity for you. It is tough, but it's not impossible because both Victor and I found somebody. But through some contact, yeah.
Yeah, and guys, just we won't belabor the point, but research opportunities come in two types: paid or non-paid. Okay, so just keep in mind as well. Two quick questions that I can just answer very quickly. I think John asks, can you do a sub-I after medical school graduation? I actually, no, I don't know if I can answer this. I guess it's yes, because Aditya, you did a sub-I, right?
Yeah. I mean, the sub-I is what it's just basically you having that clinical experience and doing what the medical students do. I don't think it's not like a super formalized thing for you because you've already graduated medical school, but it lets the program where you're doing that sub-I write a nice letter of recommendation and prove to the residents that you can do the clinical work.
Exactly.
So definitely you can, correct.
Possible. I guess that's very program dependent, and you'd have to contact programs individually for that. Sufyan asks, is it possible to change your visa from J1 to H1B? I know that answer because I just went through all this visa stuff myself. The answer is no. If you start day one on a J1, you can only remain on a J1 until you complete your back to home service for 2 years. You are not eligible if you start on a J1 from day one. So unfortunately, this is one of the things you have to think about in terms of timing. But yes, J1 is a very strict visa process. Aditya, the next question is directed at
Oh,
you
yeah.
with regards to your plan B.
Yeah, I think, the pre-residency fellowship, which is in neurosurgery, um, that gives you a little more face time with the neurosurgeons. If you are doing a prelim surgery year, you're going to be in general surgery and you may not even see a neurosurgeon all year. But I think when you're thinking about one of those, I think the pre-residency fellowship in neurosurgery is probably a little better because if a spot opens up in the program by chance, you have a way potentially to get in. The prelim surgery, I don't have personal experience with it, but it may be an option if it's for some reason you have to. But I think it's going to be very challenging to get back into neurosurgery because the prelim surgical interns don't interact with neurosurgery much at all.
The one case I would say that I know a case of a colleague of mine, he did a prelim year surgery and
Mhm.
then just applied again. He just applied
Oh,
to the match. And although he didn't match, he actually got picked up as a two because there was a spot opening as a two and he'd done a year. So, I mean, you can't plan these things, but it's not impossible, I think, if you go down that path.
correct.
Um, Ali asks the next question: how do you think the pass-fail of step one will affect IMGs? I mean, that's a very interesting question. I don't think there's a clear answer. I think some people can make an argument that it will favor you in the sense that it will allow you to, if you're very productive, allow you to shine that way. But I think also in some ways it may not because it has to push the emphasis somewhere else for who to interview and how to rank. And if it pushes it in the direction of US clinical experience, US based letters, if it goes in that direction, then those IMGs without that will be disadvantaged. So I think that's program dependent and hard to predict. And the benefit of time, we might just move on. And Aditya, do you want to take the next question by
Yeah.
Ahmad?
I have a couple questions. This is from Ahmed. In your experience, what are features that programs worry about IMG applications? I'm asking so that I can, yeah. I think nothing that they worry about. I think if they think you're a good candidate, they're going to match you high, rank you high. The visa situation is one thing for sure. Because they don't know what visa you want, or sometimes that discussion hasn't happened. Sometimes if you I mean, if there's a program that you know is very interested in you and you're very interested in them, or if your mentor is asking you about what your visa situation is, you should have that sorted out so you can give them an answer. The reason they're probably asking is because they want to rank you potentially. Sometimes that's why people are interested. So that is one thing. ERAS application, what is considered as research experience? It's been a while since I did that, but for me, it was the 2 years I spent. I know, Victor, you have anything to add there?
Oh, sorry, D. I was just going to say, I think it's everything. I think it includes any sort of presentations, any sort of abstracts, publications, and years spent researching.
Right. Yeah. Don't minimize it. I think if you have spent the time, then put it on there. Yeah. IMG is considered as minorities. I'm not 100% sure how that works, but it is tough. And you are definitely, you're going to be in the minority in your program, but I don't know if it's something that affects your application.
Asad, sorry, the next question comes from Asad. When do you recommend requesting one's mentor to make calls on one's behalf? I think, a call from your mentor can help you secure interviews. So during interview season, but a call from your mentor can also help express your interest in a program. So also during ranking season. So I would suggest multiple times during the whole period. Prakash, the next question from Prakash is: are there any specific universities which offer pre-residency fellowships? I think Adit, you just mentioned it. There are some. I don't have an active list at the top of my head, but I'm sure if you look online, there must be a list somewhere for that. And so we'll leave that there. And similarly, Chris's question was, are there any neurosurgery externship programs that I can rotate to? Again, I think this is all online program dependent. If you have a list of programs, definitely by reaching out to the training program and asking, can never hurt. But yes, Chris, yeah, sorry, I don't have a full list for you right now, but it is there online. And the last question, Adit, you do want to take that one?
Yeah, any tips or advice handling the interviews? No, I think, when you go for the interviews, I mean, you're interviewed just like any other graduate from the US. I don't think there's anything really this thing. Sometimes they ask about your experience in your home country, which is something which is unique and something you can describe well. And your research may come up a lot because that's what's going to shine on your application. And so that's something you want to be well versed in. If they do ask about your visa, have an answer ready because sometimes it may not be the chairman himself, but it could be the program coordinator, and they take all that information into account when they make their rankings.
I think for internationals, at least from my experience, a very common question was why the US. I think I got that everywhere.
Yeah.
So, having an answer for that. But also they could ask, more other things. I got asked about cricket a couple of times, for example. So, it's like just conversations here and
Yeah.
there. But yeah, guys, it's just, get this whole journey, if this is what you decide to embark on, is a very big journey. It's not a little undertaking. And I hope that, just by listening to what Aditya and I had to say has kind of helped shed some light on this process, which at least when I was going through was very, murky, for want of a better word. So if that's it, guys, there are some email addresses on the screen right now. Please write them down. Please reach out to us if you have any other questions. But I think we've reached time. So Aditya, thank you so much for your time and your opinion.
Thanks, Victor.
Everyone else, thank you so much for your time as well. And again, University of Miami, we're very proud and very happy to be able to share, have this platform to share with you guys, and reach out to us if you have any other questions through the email links below. I'm going to end this presentation now, guys. So thank you very much. Stay safe, and we'll join you next month for another Resident Hour.